Thank you, Stephen. Good morning to you all.
Good morning.
I'm very happy to be back here. I studied at Roehampton University there, and I lived with Adrian for a year. And he printed my dissertation actually when I was panicking and all these things suddenly. So I really feel connected that I'm here. It's a special time. I get worried when people ask, are we recording this speech? Because I said myself, they all want to sleep. And this and that later, but that's fine. So what I'll do is, I'll first of all give you the background to the context in which we run schools in Zimbabwe, so that you understand the struggles and challenges and the opportunities that we have. So from there, I'll bring you down to just briefly my experience in South America when I visited there, the Fair Laguna schools, and from there then the birth of the project that I now call Unlocking the Future for our Jesuit schools in Zimbabwe. And from there, I will narrow it down to education for justice, and then I think I'll leave it there for further reflection discussion. If that's okay? Thank you very much. So I'll take you through the early years of the Zimbabwe education system, 80s. There was free universal primary education, expansion of teacher programs, thriving economy. Even then, the Zim dollar was stronger than the US dollar in those days. 85 to 90% national literacy, as you can see, golden age. First country in Africa to invest in satellite communication. At that time, unemployment was 2.5%. We called the bread basket of Africa, and also a regional leader in socio-economic development. So those were the golden years. So what happened? Year 2000, the beginning of a visible collapse. And I say in a special way visible, in the sense that the educational system was collapsing actually before, but it was not as pronounced as it was in the year 2000. And for some of you who follow news, the chaotic land reform and random farm invasions that we witnessed, and farm schools, they were planted by self-styled war veterans. They would hold all-night meetings at schools and burn furniture for the bonfire. And that happened. And relocation to new lands increases school dropouts at that time. There were visible signs of economic collapse and social repression. At that point, the government was beginning to print the money so that they can give the war veterans and also money to use as they engaged in the war in Congo. So at that time, things began to come to the head. So beginnings of a systematic teacher victimization by the ruling party. In 2000, the party MDC was born, and there's a new party. It attracted a lot of young people who were intelligent, and most of those were teachers. And that's the time the party was targeting teachers as the bad guys. And also, the exodus intensified at that time, year 2000. So I'm just picking some years that are crucial for our understanding. In the year 2005, there was Operation Muramba Trina. Some of you, I think, follow news. 700,000 people were displaced in the urban areas. Their houses destroyed by the government. 1.2 million children dropped from school in one decade, according to UNICEF, their out-of-school children report in 2010. There was also increase in the number of vulnerable children in 2005. 2008, the total collapse. You can see that young man clutching billions of dollars in the streets and not being mugged at all. So it tells you perhaps that was worth a loaf of bread or something. So we got to that. It was a very difficult time for the Zimbabwean people. Hyperinflation at 231 million. Even economists could not understand that a country could reach that extent. Teacher salaries completely eroded. In January 2009, a teacher was getting an equivalent of $1 US. $1 US, that's what they were getting at the end of the year, at the end of the month. The per capita grant stops. Until now, government is just not bothered about it. Massive stay away by teachers. Unsupervised students vandalize school infrastructure. At that time, you were better off on the streets than in school. There was no motivation to come to school. There were kids on the streets selling petrol, exchanging money, and they could make a better living. Dodgy deals, getting more money, US dollars and all. So even asking kids to go to school was pointless. Teachers' image as well here highly compromised because the teachers earned nothing. And more students began to disrespect teachers because teachers didn't get anything and all these things. And even the whole idea of a teacher, I mean, when I grew up, the teacher was the most important person in your life. He knew everything. He was white, he was respected. But at that time, I remember one of the local newspapers published a cartoon, and the Minister of Education talking to baboons and saying, who wants to be a teacher? And all baboons scattering, running away. Who wants to be a teacher? So that's how they compromise the image there. 2008 was a very difficult time for many people in Zimbabwe. There was systematic state-sponsored violence here, especially against teachers. It was really targeting teachers. Teachers were embarrassed in meetings. These ruling party people, youth would come, gather the whole school together with the students and teachers, and single out teachers and embarrass them, and just say these are the traitors. Some of them being beaten and all these things. 20,000 teachers flee the country. School leaving exams supervised by the army and the police at the end because there's no one there. Over 3 million Zimbabweans flee to the diaspora. And most children at that time were left or abandoned with maids and elderly relatives. A number of orphans and vulnerable children rises dramatically. That's 2008. So unlocking the future, the best. So that's just the background of where we are or where we're coming from. So in 2010, I was invited by Entraculturas to visit South America, to visit the Fé Alegria schools, Faith and Joy, and just to see how they do it and to see if there are possibilities that they can bring that concept of Fé Alegria to Africa. So I visited Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador. And I was really struck by the way Fé Alegria were running very good schools in very poor communities. And I began to ask questions while I was in South America and saying, how are we educating back home? How are we doing it? I was particularly struck by that particular school there, kids waving. That's in Colombia. They say that they built that school when there was a lot of drugs and guns and all this in the neighborhood. They built that school specifically to transform the community. And that school has 1,600 kids. And they are saying that after 10 years, they've actually reduced, the cases of drugs and shooting and all that in that school. And I was really touched by that. So back home, that was the question I asked. How are we Jesuits educating in Zimbabwe? Looking at all our schools. And my conclusion was that, actually, we're not educating in a special way at all. That picture on the right, that's Hartman House. High fees there and good education. Those little kids there walking to school barefoot, there's 3 girls there. St. Rupert's Smile, they pay $10 per term. So that's $30 per year. And the quality there is poor because of the fee they pay. So I said to myself, so why are we educating at all? Because the government does the same. Other private schools do the same. They give you what you give them. So I say, now we need to rethink how we're educating. And we want to run good schools for poor communities. That was my challenge. How do we do that? Because the income is very low. So that was the reflection I had. And the first thing that I wanted to understand was that these are just assumptions. How can I get scientific knowledge about how we're educating? So I looked for money. I got some support from Entraculturas to do an assessment and evaluation of all our schools and to find how are we guys educating. In as much as in Zimbabwe, a lot of parents really want to bring their kids to Jesuit schools. I mean, they fall over each other just to do that. But I was saying, are we giving what the parents are looking for in Jesuit schools? So together with Mrs. Paddy Pacey, who's sitting there, that's St. Rupert's, we went around all the 18 schools and produced a 50-page report. And this is what we found. The findings from the 50-page report, the Pacey and Arimoso report, 2011, that actually the core mission, Jesuit values and practices had been largely depleted in the majority of schools. And that there was reduced capacity and functioning in most Jesuit schools. There was lack of policies and instruments to monitor and evaluate Jesuit educational practice. There was general low income in many of our schools. There was reduced educational output in most Jesuit schools, unsatisfactory performances in school management and leadership, weak participation in teaching and learning excellence, reduced community involvement in education delivery, lack of child care and protection mechanisms, irrelevant and outdated curriculum options, absence of 21st century teaching learning skills, diminished morale and self-esteem among most teachers, and deteriorating infrastructure and environment in Jesuit schools. So how to respond? I went through many processes to be able to come and set up the education office. Twice I had to present my idea to the whole province. And a lot of people were saying, don't fix it if it's not broken. What do you want to do with the schools? We run good schools in this country. Actually, people praise us for running good schools. And I said, no, we don't. No, we don't. We need to do something. And I said, I can't continue to play the role of a coordinator. The previous guy, before I took over in 2007, was simply a coordinator. Go to schools, when there's a bushfire, talk to them. He was not implementing anything. He was allowing schools just to run, and it was okay. And I was saying, we need to set up a structure that actually looks at our education and try to respond to the 50-page report that we brought out. So I called this guy. I was very lucky to have this guy called Corbett Mpofu, who works with me, very switched on. And there are very few people like him in Zimbabwe. They've all gone out of the country. Very switched on. He understands, very passionate about education. A former headmaster, teacher for many years. And when we talked, when I gave him the vision, he said, this is what we should be doing. And he said, don't worry about, and I said to him, I don't have money now to pay you when I employ you, but this is what I'm looking at. And he said, let's start. Money will come later. He was so passionate about it. So we set up this office, and then we sat down and went through that report and we said, how do we respond? We came up with 15 key result areas. 1, igniting pedagogy and ethos, educational governance, leadership, management, development, teaching, learning, excellence, communities, school communities participating in education delivery, curriculum development, Jesuit schools, child care and protection program, environment and all these things with the concept of igniting little kids in our schools, Jesuit education IT, student leadership, education conferencing, Jesuit companions program, education advocacy as well, education research, the Jesuit education and teacher development program, Jesuit schools infrastructure and development. So those were the key result areas that we thought. Now we can look at these and bring back the quality that we're looking for. And when we came up with this unlocking the future, as some of you know, you already at one of the key result areas that I talked about there, number 11, Jesuit Companions Program. It was already in place, rolling on. And we were looking at how do we actually look at that and make it more sense and create more sense within the bigger idea of the unlocking the future. And we also realized that most of your efforts have done well in the key result area 15, infrastructure-wise. And I know that schools in the UK have fundraised and have done well in that area. But according to us, it's one of the 15 key result areas that can bring about true quality in our schools. Now, education for justice, why? Now, I narrowed down. That first key result area number 1, core mission, Jesuit values and practices have been largely depleted in the majority of schools. So we go back to key result area number 1. So education for justice for us is at the center of our spirituality in the faith that does justice. And therefore we cannot waste time deliberating whether we should do it or not. By embracing that key result area number 1, Jesuit pedagogy, Jesuit ethos, we're tied, or we're actually automatically tied to the faith that does justice. And therefore, talking about education for justice naturally falls into place in Jesuit schools, at least. Now, opportunities for education for justice in Jesuit schools in Zimbabwe. I also want to remind you that, in as much as my presentation is very specific to Zimbabwe, but from my experience traveling around Africa, visiting Jesuit schools, most of those factors actually run across the continent. Most of the factors that we're dealing with in Zimbabwe. So that example here, very interesting. In 1999, UNESCO produced that book called Education for Human Rights and Democracy in Southern Africa. It was distributed to the 4 countries down there, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, I think, Botswana, to use in schools. They're trying to promote the whole idea of democracy and all these things so that kids can go through school understanding these issues. And the then minister Chigwedere, who was the guy in charge, came out even on TV and said, I'm banning that book. I can't have it in schools because that book is too political for the children. So that's the government that we have, that anything to do with democracy, anything to do with justice is not tolerated because it touches on what actually they want to protect. So I call these opportunities, not challenges really. So we've got a government that deliberately discourages anything to do with issues of human rights and justice in schools. Anything like that is intercepted, it is interpreted as political. And by imposing history as a compulsory subject, that's what the government did 5 years ago. They said, we want history to be compulsory in all schools. Kids should learn history. But of course, there's an agenda. They want to push the agenda of party politics because most of the textbooks really praise ZANU-PF and Mugabe for having liberated the country and how much they've done and all these things. So it's really a political agenda. It's not really that kids should learn history in a very dignified way. So you can see what they're doing behind the scenes. And over the years, we have produced morally dysfunctional individuals, and we see the results now. I mean, during 2008, during 2009, it was chaotic. Nobody even thought about what is moral, what is the right thing to do, what is not the right thing to do. If I knew where bread was, and you don't know, if bread costs $1, just give me $15 because you don't know where it is. And people didn't stop to think about what is the right thing to do in a chaotic situation. People exploiting each other. And we've carried that actually until now. Until now, people have just, they do that and they feel it's okay. There's no problem to do that. If I know what you don't know, if I know that cars are costing $2,000, if I come to you and say, can I bring you a Mac, it's $15,000, it's okay. You know, it has become a culture that is worrying. And if you look at the syllabus on life skills, it's really reduced to issues of HIV, AIDS. And you can see what the government is doing. Just talk about HIV. Don't talk about other issues. Talk about HIV, AIDS, and condoms and all these things. And in life skills, there's a lot we can teach our kids there. And many schools also, besides our schools, don't see any value in moral and religious education. The obsession of passing. Do they achieve a 30% pass rate? 80%, that's what they're worried about. And the government hammers on that. They're looking, they don't look at the quality of what we are producing. So the opportunities, again, the 18 schools in our country, with 18 schools, 14,500 children in our schools and about 700 teachers. They exist within a socio-economic and political context that is characterized by structural and political violence, intolerance, and polarization that is now common to Zimbabwean families. There's poor governance and deteriorating civic participation also of ordinary Zimbabweans. It continues to present specific risks for Zimbabwean communities, making them vulnerable in issues of injustice. Zimbabwe also has developed a culture of grab what you can and while you can, corruption, I've talked about that, unscrupulous exploitation of people in vulnerable situations. The gap between the rich and the poor continues to widen and everybody thinks it's fairly normal. There's nothing wrong about that. And many of our kids are not able to have the tools to question. Last time I visited my brother and I bought a newspaper that was talking about this guy who works for the Zimbabwe Football Association. I think he was awarding himself $60,000 US per month in a country that people are suffering. And I put it there, I said to my niece, who's now from 6, I said, what do you think about that? And he says to me, wow, that's a lot of money. And I said, yeah, but what do you think? He said, well, I don't know. Yeah, maybe you should give some money to the poor. And I said, no. Why should you get 60,000? So you could see I was engaging, but it took me time to get her to be critical about that headline. And I said to myself, I think we're failing somewhere. That our kids are not curious, they're not questioning, they just, straight-jacketed throughout the school. And after that, when they become MPs and all that, they don't think about moral issues at all. They don't ask, why this? Why should we be doing this? Why not this? They don't ask. And I think we'll be challenged to have our kids question even at an early stage. They should question. E4J, how? Some thoughts that I just have there. Workshops for teachers, and I call that the detoxification. Now, what we have in Zimbabwe is teachers who are not, and I've always said that, I mean, it's a bit uncomfortable for many. And I will say that what we have in Zimbabwe in our schools are not educators, but civil servants. They got to do things according to the Ministry of Education and do them right. You scheme, you do this, and you can't think outside the box. And I said, I want educators. I want people who can step back out of that and think new ways of teaching and educating. I don't want civil servants. And I've been struggling with that whole idea. So, and I'm thinking, if we have to embark on that education for justice, that's the first thing that we need to do, workshops for teachers. And we have to detoxicate. And a lot of teachers are very much afraid that if we say that you can't say this in this country, and we've got to detoxicate their mind. It's going to be long, but I think it can be done. One of the things that we could do is to start with their situation. One day we were having a seminar, and I was saying to them, how much are you getting? And they were saying, oh, now it's a bit better, but it's not enough. It's about $300 per month. And I said, mm-hmm. And they say, is that your salary? And they all say, yeah. And I said, but it's not. So in 2009, when we dollarized, the government said it didn't have money. So it said we'll give teachers and all public servants an allowance. Not a salary. Salaries are eroded, so we give an allowance. And they've been increasing that allowance over the years. Nobody has questioned about the real salary. Where is it? And I said, you guys are just getting an allowance. Where is your salary? When are they going to give you salary? And suddenly I saw these guys blinking and saying, but you're right. And I said, okay, let's move on. One teacher stood up and said, Father, but can we talk about this more? And I said, those are issues of justice. You start where they are. And I'm positive that the detoxification will happen. Of course, not everyone perhaps can buy into it, but I'm sure some critical minds can be born there, and we can move with them. Workshop for students as well. Talks for parents, pretty tricky there. You've got parents who belong to the ruling party and who are also profiting in this country and all, but we can try. Maybe design a curriculum, syllabus, teaching and learning material, yeah. But I believe that we can design a curriculum in a syllabus, but it could just die there in a document. Because I'm thinking more education for justice really permeating the school life. Imagine clubs such as CLC, debate clubs, public speaking, writers clubs, people for others, interact, drama. Imagine engineering behind the scenes so that these clubs, these kids, these students in our schools are able within their clubs to talk about issues of justice. Debate clubs, what are they debating about? Public speaking, what sort of topic can we encourage them to pick up? Writers club, what are they writing about? People for others, what sort of things are they doing? The drama, what are they presenting down there? What are we doing? So I'm thinking more is education for justice permeating our schools. And I'm thinking through that, if we re-reflect on the companions program, we could say, well, if you have a writers club in the UK with a writers club there, can this be talking to each other, stimulating creativity, talking about issues of justice at that level? The drama club could maybe, when we say visits now, we can carefully design the visits so that the drama club can come here and present pieces of work that actually articulate real issues in the country, and they can discuss. And I'm seeing that giving more life than just a document that sits there and teachers are afraid of using it. So I have more ideas around education for that justice there. There's need also for careful engineering of the whole project. Anything to be done has to fall under moral and religious education. If I'm going to say we now have civic education in Jesuit schools, of course the government is going to come down on me and say, what is it you're trying to teach the kids? So we say, okay, it's moral and religious education. We're allowed to do that. But you design it in such a way it can articulate real issues of justice there, and the kids can relate to that. So that's generally my thoughts there. The main challenge, it is from the education point of view, is the education office that I set up, which is rich in vision and passion, and is trying to transform education in Zimbabwe, but really is desperately underfunded. That's my biggest struggle. I've had support from Jesuit Missions here. I've had support from Jesuit Missions in Germany, and also Portuguese from the Netherlands, and interculturals from Spain to fund this office. But we still have big challenges in terms of designing workshops, calling teachers together, visiting the schools, calling speakers who can come and give input to teachers who need a lot of, I think, renewal in their professional life. here's a story that perhaps can engage us further. I think, how many minutes? Yeah, okay, yeah. This is a story that happened at St. Joseph's. Who said it? Yes, St. Joseph's Primary School. It's a school in Chishawasha. I'd visited that school for my annual normal thing. And the headmaster was excited because something had just happened. And I said, what had happened? Now, what had happened was that St. Joseph's has 1,000 kids, and they move in groups going home. And of course, the further they go, the more they split up into smaller groups. But when they take off from school, they move in big groups. And 30 kids from St. Joseph's Primary School were going home around 3 in the afternoon. And as they were going home, towards them was coming 2 white kids about their age as well. They've been sent by their mother to buy airtime and a couple of things from the shops, little shops. And one of the boys in the big group began to shout, say, "Whites, you took our land. Whites, you took our land. Go back to your country." And then suddenly you've got 30 kids charging towards these 2 white kids. And for most of them, it was fine. I mean, they fell back after a couple of meters. But the 3 boys who pursued these 2 kids, pursued them further up the hill, and these kids were screaming and running away, and they threw away the money that they had to buy airtime. And those 3 boys picked up the money for $30 and split it amongst themselves, and they went away. In the crowd, among the crowd, in the group of the kids coming from St. George's, there was one girl. When she saw that, she went back to school and reported everything to the headmaster. And this next day, the kids were called, the 3 boys were called, the parents were called, and they managed to retrieve $27. They'd squandered the $3. I don't know how long they were going to squander the $30, but the parents were called, and then they managed to get in touch with the mother of those 2 white kids and say, this is what happened. And what was striking was that when these 2 white kids went back home, they didn't say anything. They said, "We lost the money." It was very striking for me. They didn't say anything. They just kept quiet. They said, "We lost the money." And the mother came, and she was given the $27, and she thanked, and she went away. And then at the assembly, Mr. Gizardo, who is the headmaster, said to the whole school, "This is what happened. What do we do with these boys?" And the whole school said, "Beat them, whack them. This is what they deserve." And then he said, "How many is enough?" And of course, some shouted, 16. And some said, "That's a bit too much." You see, the small minds are discerning how much can go with this kind of offense. And eventually they said, "Okay, 3 of the best ones." Okay, the headmaster said, "Well, I'll do that. The verdict has been passed, so 3 of the best, never do it again." And when he finished telling me the story, Mr. Gizardo said, "So far, that's what happened. That's how we solved the problem." And I said to myself, "We've just gotten started. You haven't solved anything." That's what I said to myself. That story has many issues around it. Issues of what kind of kids come to our school and what is influencing them to think the way they think and to react the way they react. I'm sure they hear their fathers at home drunk talking about the white man, farms and all. I'm sure they hear on TV Mugabe hate speech. I'm sure they're hearing all sorts of things, and it builds into them. And I'm saying now, how do we counter that in our schools, that kids like that, at that age, the primary school, who can have this kind of hatred that they're picking up from home, from TV, from newspapers, from everywhere. And if you look at the story as well, why didn't these white kids report? Why didn't they? Too terrified? What happened there? And also it raises the question of corporal punishment. The kids are asked, "What do we do with this?" Whack them, because that's all they know. That's all they know. They didn't say, okay, they can pick papers or you can detain them, say whack them. That's all they know. So it also raises issues of how we're educating and how we bring up these kids in our schools. But when I look at that whole story, there's one thing that touches me there. There's one symbol that is powerful for me. It's that little girl who stepped out of line from the group to go and report, to do something different. And I think we could see ourselves in that. And that perhaps something that what we're doing here, not many people are doing. But we've got to step out of the group and do something different. She wasn't afraid to be bullied. I don't think she thought about that when she went to report. She was in danger to be bullied going home and saying, "Why did you report?" But she simply did the right thing at that time. Stopped, went back, reported everything, and she made a whole difference. And I think back home, I know that I can easily step out of line like that girl there. I think that's why I'm more connected to her. That probably what I'll do it's not what the crowds could do. Wanted to introduce education for justice in schools in Zimbabwe, well, there could be trouble. But I think that girl gives me a lot of passion. She inspires me that it can be done and we can make a difference. It's a blank slide. What if? What if here we refuse to give up on this idea? What if we can rethink the way we've been connecting the schools, the partnership? What if we put our resources together and fundraise for a better cause? What if we rethink our relationships? Stony Hess and Peter Skubatana. What if we can make those ideas that I've been bringing here true in the next 5 years? What if I just left that slide blank because I don't have answers? And I'm hoping that at the end of the day, we can have lots of what ifs and think how we can move ahead with this very special companions program, that we can make real changes. I know that many of you, when you come to Zimbabwe, I know you're heartbroken when you walk into school, that the toilets, the windows are broken, and all these things. And I've always said that when I walk into our school, any one of our schools, what breaks my heart is when I go to grade 4 and discover that all the kids can't read. And that's what usually breaks my heart. The kids can't read at grade 4. Nothing to do with windows and infrastructure, but just the kids can't read. And that's what breaks my heart more. So what if we think along those lines in terms of how we fundraise or we connect? What if we see how much impact this will have on the UK schools? What if we actually really see that we're not just fundraising, but actually we're getting a lot more, that connection? The different clubs I talked about, debate club, drama club, what if we can renew all this? And I think that to embrace a faith that does justice is to accept the responsibility to change the world where we are. Even if we are victims of social, economic, and political circumstances, I think we're still not exempted from our own responsibility to be agents of change. In short, we have no reason to be helpless, even in the face of tyranny. And that's what I think. Thank you very much.